We'd like to welcome everyone that's here. We're going to talk a little bit about MATCorp and specifically about the opportunities available for medical technologies. So that's the subject of our discussion today. So I'd like to start off with just a brief intro of our panelists. So I'm going to start actually, if you can do a quick 2-minute intro of our panelists, and I'm going to start with Elizabeth Sump. Please go forward.
Hi, thanks so much, Albert. My name is Elizabeth Sump. I'm a Senior Director in the Office of Strategic Alliances and Technology Development at Cleveland Clinic. I've been there for 21 years now. I work with early stage inventors who are going from idea to invention. We also work on the other side of the innovations process. I do a lot of work with our early stage startup companies. A lot of it's involved in securing early stage non-dilutive funding. And I'm really pleased to be here.
Great, thank you. Next up is Bill Howell.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Howell. I'm the president of the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, colloquially known as MTech. And the MTech is a nonprofit that has a 10-year contract with the DoD that really tries to find new technologies that match up with what their needs are. My own little background, I did 35 years with Uncle Sam, most of that in a civilian suit. Thanks to a lottery number of 39, I did put 4 years in a green suit, but got out shortly thereafter, and have been with the medics probably for about 32 of those years and enjoyed it. I have to admit, taking care of soldiers who put themselves in harm's way is a whole lot better than being one of the soldiers who put themselves in harm's way.
Understand. Okay, and then my business partner, Bill Mahoney, please.
Oh, yeah, Bill Mahoney. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mid-America Applied Technologies Corporation, or MATCorp. I guess I'm guilty of being a serial entrepreneur. I've had a number of successful venture-backed startups, but then went into the nonprofit R&D sector by becoming the executive chairman of a company called Advanced Technology International, which is I guess the close partner to the MTech consortium. And in that organization, we were able to really expand the scope of the federal applied R&D landscape by helping create and manage a number of other transaction arrangements. And that corporate and contract structure with the federal government is an important element of what we're going to be talking about today.
Great, thank you. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. So I'm going to start with you, Bill Mahoney, and just to give a top level, can you briefly describe in layman's terms what an OTA, or other transactional agreement, is, and why this has become one of the fastest growing contracting vehicles used by the federal government?
Right. So an OTA, or OT as they're coming to be called, because nobody could figure out whether it was another transaction arrangement or another transaction agreement, but so they're kind of OTs today. But as a contract structure that is not subject to federal acquisition regulations, or the FAR, which we hear a lot about. OTAs are granted by federal agencies, typically to consortium management firms. Some OTAs are granted to OEMs who are supplying like the F-35 or things like that. But the primary reason for OTAs is to deliver applied R&D with fast contracting, to deliver operational prototypes that can be tested by the federal agencies, particularly the DoD. And typically those prototypes require a portfolio or an integration of somewhat disparate technologies. And the consortium manager encourages that integration by fostering teams of member subcontractors inside the consortium. MATCorp is just one of those such companies, right? So our part of our mission is to form teams of Ohio-based companies that can bid successfully for solicitations that are inside OTAs, such as MTech.
Great. Thank you, Bill. So I'm going to go next. And of course, we do have a live open Q&A. So please put your questions in. We're happy to address those. I'm going to go to Bill Howell next. And I'm going to ask you, this discussion is going to be sort of focused on medical technologies. So if you can, Bill, can you please describe the Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium, MTech? What's its mission and what's its vision?
So like any other contractor for the government, the mission initially was to win the first contract, and the vision was to get the recompete. We've done both of those, so I guess we're okay. Now, beyond that, really what we were after, we were formed together. The four companies came together, and one of them, as Bill had mentioned, was ATI, his former company, which really does a great job in consortium management, contracting, finances, and IT that has to go with that, the website and all the rest. But we really were put together to make sure that we could hit on the military R&D needs, their clinical needs, specifically on the battlefield, and somewhat in once those soldiers and sailors and everybody else who came back and needed long-term care. And that is our primary mission, is to be able to support the military in that R&D fashion. And we do that, I have to tell you, largely around outreach. And today's an example of that. We sit there and we try and find companies and or universities, foundations, all sorts of different entities. We've got 620 of them right now in our consortium, which match up to different needs that the military has. So we have a very strong outreach. We see, I'll be honest with you, we see something like 2,200 companies a year that are new, that are not refus. So we see a lot of it, and that's due to thousands of partnerships, seemingly, and being able to do that. Our second mission, though, I'd like to hit on, or maybe where our vision really is because we started with the military, and we're in our 9th year, just about to start our 9th year of a 10-year contract. We've already been told we're getting the renewal for the next 10 for the military, but public health as well. Because anything the military comes up with, 9/10 of that ends up in the hands sometime in the civilian sector as well. And on the other side of it, if we can get stuff that's through the civilian sector to come back to the military, that is obviously a gain as well. So we've been lucky enough that we've won a couple as a subcontractor, a couple of contracts with ARPA-H and with BARDA, and we're waiting for a couple more decisions on BARDA right now. So the hope that we can bring that sort of synergy and all that. The last thing I will say before I give up the podium is, we're not all the medical for the military. The ChemBio program is its own set of worlds, to be honest with you. So we do the rest of the medical, so combat casualty care and infectious disease and operational medicine and TBI and PTSD and all those things. I'll go in a little bit more detail later, but realize that we're not the only one who does medical. There is another one, which ATI has that leadership on, in the ChemBio world.
Great. Thank you, Bill. That's great. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you next, and just ask, Cleveland Clinic is big name in our region. So can you just briefly
just the United States and the world too.
Yeah. Yeah, the world. So can you briefly describe your role at the clinic and what you do?
Sure. I work with inventors who are transitioning from a research role, a strict, our side of the R&D, to switching over to technology development. And so I run the office that I run works. We run a process called Idea to Invention, which really is focused on helping researchers go from taking a strictly investigative research, let's see what happens next sort of approach, to saying, how am I going to translate what I do into a medical product that can then treat patients? we work side by side with the innovations group, which is the technology transfer office. But this is really a focus a lot more on saying, how do I make that transition from R to D? Inventors don't always know how to do that. They don't always know how to become deliverables focused rather than investigative focused. So we train people, but then we also really focus on what is the best path forward for the technology. And so oftentimes I'll work with them to say, what are the next 3 critical milestones you need to meet? How are you going to get those funded? And I'm sure we'll get into this more, but making that transition from something that's biologically relevant to something that's ready for first in human can take 2 to 10 years and $2 to $20 million. And it's not easy money to get. Licensees aren't willing to take those risks. Most companies aren't willing to take those risks. NIH, until recently, kind of says, once you found a biologically relevant research finding, we're done. It's development now. And so I help work with a number of different funding mechanisms. OTs, I think, are a terrific way of helping to bridge that gap. And it's also something that I recommend. The other half of my job is advising Cleveland Clinic startup companies. So I sit on boards for several of those companies. I spent 20 years in the private sector before I came to the Cleveland Clinic. A lot of that was in venture funded startups. And so helping them figure out how to get to a decent valuation before they have to seek dilutive funding is really important. And a lot of times you've got to get your technology to a point where you're ready for first in human trials before you're really investable. And again, I think that money is just as hard to find on the private sector as it is in a research hospital. So a lot of what I do is chase down money. But it's for a good cause.
No, that's great. Bill Mahoney, I'm going to go to you next for a question. I mean, you've been involved in OTAs for a long, long time. Initially in South Carolina. You and I started a dialogue, roughly 4 or 5 years ago. So what led you to co-found, MATCorp in Ohio? What was behind that? What were you thinking when we started these conversations, Bill?
Well, fortunately, in South Carolina, we were able to demonstrate the highly beneficial impact of federal funding on technology-based economic development in the state. Through the 11 years that I led ATI, we had third-party consultants confirm that we helped over 700 companies inside of South Carolina. We helped form or maintain 15,000 technology jobs in the state. We had over $1 billion economic impact every year that I was responsible for the organization. And so we were able to prove that connecting to federal funding through OTAs, organizing and managing teams of member subcontractors could have an extraordinary beneficial impact on South Carolina. I believe that the same opportunity, in fact, an even richer opportunity, is here in the state of Ohio. Not that it's a negative or anything, but there are tons more medical, university, and corporate assets in Ohio than there are in South Carolina. It's just a fact of life, right? And particularly from a corporate standpoint, in the areas of contract manufacturing and systems integration, and a lot of the skills that are necessary in the teams that we are forming to bid, inside MTech and other ATI consortia. So I think that the opportunity here is much greater than it was in South Carolina. And I think that the impact, the formula can be the same, right? It's talent, technology, and capital. And as Elizabeth mentioned, if the part of the bridge from discovery to deployment is federal funding through a contract that helps a company create operational prototypes. We know it works, so no reason not to try it in Ohio as well.
I'm going to stay with you for just one other additional quick question. And you and I have talked from the very beginning, Bill Mahoney, about the green matrix, where we tried to overlap what are the assets that we have versus what are the needs of the federal government, particularly in OTAs. And if you could just make a couple comments about that, because it's related to what you just said, and then we'll move on.
Well, part of the formula and from the operational standpoint to make the technology-based economic development outcomes occur is you need to match the strengths and capabilities of your state and region with the needs of the federal government as expressed in the solicitations that come through the consortia like MTech. So if you can build a matrix that aligns the assets in the state and their capabilities with the needs of the federal agencies and the solicitation patterns of the consortium managers. Now you've got, and it takes a while to learn how to do that. I mean, it's an intense matching exercise it's like a 3 to 5 sided, tetrahedron or whatever the right word is, right? I wasn't good in math, but in any way, if you can align those assets with the needs and the processes of the consortium manager and the needs of the federal agencies, now you've got a formula that you can work over and over and over again. And as Bill said earlier, getting the first one, and then you get the second one, and then after a while you've got real business going, right? And that's the path that we're on at MATCorp.
Great.
Hey, Al, I'm gonna play off what Bill just said for a second.
Great, thank you.
Use the MTech as an example. One of the things that the OT allows us to do is to be able to discuss, unlike the FAR, pre-solicitation and even after solicitation, before you put in your proposal, we can discuss with the potential proposers. We write the solicitations. We sit with the military, they'll tell us what it may need, and we write it. So we're quite familiar with it. The joy of that is, in many cases, there's a lot of small companies out there who have a sliver of the requirement they can cover, but they can't cover the whole thing. And we actively sit there and give them a list of other teaming partners that they can go match up with. And I think that's what Bill was trying to highlight, is that this teaming arrangement and matching up requirements within companies, we do that actively. I've got 3 PhDs. That's their primary job, is to be able to stand for what the military wants, to understand what you have and understand what you're missing, and help you go find where that is.
But that's great, Bill, and I'm gonna follow up on that. And just one of the things that's been very interesting as we've dug into this OT space is, there's a lot of statements about involving non-traditional businesses, and we've been talking about that a little bit. So can you say a little bit more about that, Bill, and what is your emphasis on in involving, sort of the not the usual suspects?
Right. Well, the whole reason, I tell you, the reason Congress really put the OT in place, I think, is really more on that lineup than anything else. They were tired of seeing the same players all the time come to the table. The military industrial base, even the medical world, was pretty stagnant in the sense of who you were playing with. And what you end up doing is those big parties go out and find the third parties with the new emerging technologies and bring them in, and it costs more, and it's more bureaucratic to get to them. So we have done the OT allows us to go directly out to those new emerging companies and seek them out. And there's some of the bureaucracy that you have to have a formal accounting system, all that stuff is not in place. So it's very easy for these companies to come in. I would tell you 60%, 70% of our membership are non-traditionals. And in most cases, they weren't going after the military at all. We went and found them and convinced them that they had a product that the military really wanted. They were off on their orthopedic thing for kids or wherever they were headed for their civilian market. And when we caught them in our outreach, we went, well, wait a minute, come here for a second. That could be translated with a little switch of 90 degrees. You can take that, and now that can be deployed on the battlefield. And why don't you come say hi and let's see how you can compete? And so I'd say 70% of our awards are to teaming partners, of which probably 60% are non-traditionals at this point. And non-traditional is just basically someone who hasn't done much work at all with the federal government.
Right. Great. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you next. So just switching a little bit. So how does the approach to technology development differ in a large academic medical center like the Cleveland Clinic versus, for example, your experience in working with small startup kinds of companies? Can you talk to that for a minute?
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, it's very similar. In other ways, it's wildly different. And I think as I talked about before, I think whether you're in an academic center or whether you're in a small company, that gap between what you can get funded through the federal government and what other companies are willing to invest in is the same no matter what. And if you're in a large company, you can self-fund that gap, that what we call the TRL3 to TRL5 gap, right? From biological relevance to first in human. When you're in even a big academic medical center, that money just isn't laying around. And likewise with a small company, you don't have that money at hand. And so a lot of times you're really hustling for, in a small company, you may be going after friends and family money to bridge that, but $20 million is a lot to bridge with friends and family. And so finding non-dilutive funding sources for translation is huge. It's paramount. What I have available inside the Cleveland Clinic that I may not have in one of my startup companies is we have a lot of internal resources. We have core facilities and our own therapeutics discovery and a prototyping shop. And so I have a lot of the advantages that you might get in a large university that a startup company may not be able to get for free or cheap. And so I think that's the biggest difference. But honestly, I think the problem when it comes to translation is the same no matter where you're doing it, unless you're working for Medtronic or Pfizer and you've got $100 million research budget.
That would be
a
couple $1 billion research budget.
Well, right. Well, I'm saying, in your particular, right, in your particular therapeutic area, I mean,
Right.
You're going to have that problem no matter where you stand. And, and kind of following on to what Bill Howell was saying, one of the things, and I was our liaison to the Department of Defense for years, and I worked a lot with defense, grants and contracts, and one of the things I love about OTs is that opportunity to have the dialogue ahead of time, the opportunity to say, hey, look, I can do 30% of this. Okay, but I don't have these things over here. And quite frankly, I don't want to build these things over here. I would love to partner with somebody, because when you're thinking about sort of that long-term business opportunity, this is an opportunity to build that partnership, because once that federal funding runs out, you've got to be able to float on your own bottom. And so having that partnership in place allows you to have that opportunity to build a real business and to get revenues out of it long term. If I didn't have that opportunity to have that dialogue, to understand the needs better ahead of time, we'd be continuing to sort of, throw proposals out into space and sit silently and hope that they come back and say yes. It's a very frustrating process. So it's one of the things I love about the OT model.
Al, real quick, if I can, off of what
Please.
Elizabeth just said. For everyone, we have over 100 academic centers with laboratories and clinical capabilities. We've got companies like Battelle that can do, have BSL and Galveston with BSL 3 and 4 facilities for ChemBio. We have 15 CROs, 13 CMOs that are part of our consortium, and another 30 consulting firms that can help you in regulatory plans, even to reimbursement. I mean, the whole gamut of things that if you're a small company, how do you get there? We realized early on that most of our awards were going to small companies and they're going to need help. And if we want them to get to where they can produce a product, we're going to try our best to figure out. And some of that we spend our own money, some of that we just connect the dots.
No, that's great. Bill Howell, I'm going to stay with you for the next line of questioning. I'm just, if you can just, take a minute, if you would, and just tell us, MATCorp has the luxury of really being tuned into what you all are looking for now and in the future. But if you could just, talk to the audience about, the key technologies that you're looking at, now and into the future and so on for a minute.
Sure.
Thanks.
Let's start off real quick as a general background. We have 5 different areas within our scope. One is infectious disease, really looking at those kind of diseases where a guy deploys to God knows where, he doesn't have a vaccine in his arm. How does he operate there and not get sick? And so we're looking at, enteric diseases, especially on floating boats, where one guy gets sick, the whole boat gets sick. And so that's both in vaccines and therapeutics within that. Wound healing and wound infection. You can't imagine right now what's going on in Ukraine. Something like 80% of all the casualties or higher are getting wound infections that are terrific or horrific. Let me rephrase that. So combat casualty care is a big piece, as you can imagine. And the most important of that is really stabilizing the patient or the soldier right up front at the point of care. So you're looking at pre-hospital and ER sort of technologies that are in there. AI and decision assist is becoming huge and allowing medics to be able to do more. And so those are areas in which we're looking at. If you can take data off a vital signs monitor and then help that medic to know how to triage his patients and who to go to first and what am I going to do. Because they don't have docs in the very front. And as we see in again in the Ukraine lesson that's going on now, docs have got to go hide because the drones are finding them everywhere. And so it's really hard to get them. You got to stabilize and maintain those poor injured folks for a while before they get in. Another area that you can imagine is in operational medicine, i.e. soldiers and sailors or Marines work in a whole lot of a different setting than in a manufacturing plant or an office. And so they've got environmental issues that they've got to worry about. What happens when I'm cold, hot, wet, dry, at altitude, all those things that you can imagine. And on top of that, of course, all the psychological health that you've got to do. Big program in PTSD, suicide prevention, substance abuse when they've seen there. And I would tell you, one of the things we saw even in the last war is polytrauma, where someone is not just getting shot once, he's getting blown up and his whole body's in different piece parts. And then you add on top of that the TBI and the PTSD that goes with it. You really do have, unfortunately, an individual who needs a whole lot of help. And the last area I think I would talk to is we do a good bit of work in IT, and that's across a fairly broad spectrum. I talked earlier about a little AI and decision assist that would take data and be able to make the medics do more, basically, than they normally could. But we do a lot of systems work. We've done some logistics systems, some blood tracking systems, and things of that nature. We've done a good bit of telehealth during the COVID piece. We did about 80 million. We set up 5 hubs and then wired those back to a whole bunch of different troop medical clinics, civilian clinics, and the whole work so that you could get the smarts out of the hubs and not have to move the patients because there was no place to move those patients to anyway, back at the main. And the final area that we work in is, so that telehealth is big, and then the training and simulation. We do a good bit of work in education, basically, and a lot of that is you have members who are not necessarily in the same location, and when they deploy, they become a team. So how do they train before they deploy? Even though they may do their day-to-day work at Walter Reed or Balboa, once you get in the field, it's a whole lot of different stuff. And so you got to continually train them. And a lot of that is asynchronous on the web and things of that nature.
Great. No, thank you. I want to just again encourage our audience. If you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and we'll address those. Bill Mahoney, I'm going to go to you next. So, you and I have had many conversations around sort of the ecosystem and how, teams are put together. And if you could spend a few minutes talking about how sort of the broader ecosystem benefits. And then, what I'm speaking towards is how you have teams that involve a large institution, a startup, maybe economic development and so on. So if you could just say a few words about that, that'd be great.
Well, the key thing is to match as closely as possible the statements of need coming through the solicitations in the consortium management firms. And I think we have all acknowledged through this that one of the advantages of OTs is that you can communicate with the consortium management firm and ultimately through their industry days with the program executives in the federal departments, right? So the relationship building and the dialogue that you can create can really help shape responses to solicitations in a very constructive way. The other thing that Bill mentioned, and I'll reinforce this, is the consortium management firms are working on behalf of the benefits for their members, the members of the consortium. So it's very often when you're in that preliminary dialogue that someone will say, boy, you guys have great peanut butter, but this company over here has got the chocolate to cover the peanut butter, so you can make the the confection come out right. And a lot of times those teams have a handful or more of members. There might be 6 or 7 companies that are collaborating on a particular solicitation. So I think that the real opportunity is for that sort of that Brownian movement between companies where through connectivity and efforts like this one that we're participating in here today, but also working with local economic development groups, with chambers of commerce, with universities and hospitals, you can identify the likely candidates that have the talent and the technology to be able to create something useful. And then the goal of organizations like MATCorp is to get us to as Elizabeth said, the non-dilutive capital through the federal contracts that can help them get across the bridge from idea to deployment.
No, thank you. And I'll pick up a little bit on that. And we've done a whole collection of white papers and initiatives, MATCorp I'm talking about specifically. And just to say it, a typical team for us will involve sort of a large institution like the clinic. A lot of times it will involve a university partner, and then typically it'll be some small startup, and then MATCorp, and that's a typical makeup of a team that we'll put together to respond to a topic area such as what MTech will put forward. And I have to say, Elizabeth, you've been very helpful, helping MATCorp identify the relevant team members that we can bring together to respond to solicitations that come out of MTech.
One of the things that I think is great about the Cleveland area, and I was talking. We're a spoke member in a consortium, an ARPA-H consortium that's being managed by ATI right now. And one of the things that we were discussing is how wonderful it is to be in the Cleveland area.
Yeah,
because both the large institutions and the Greater Cleveland Partnership have really dedicated themselves to creating an ecosystem where we cooperate more often than we compete. And you don't always see that You
Yeah.
know, go to places like Boston or Research Triangle Park or San Francisco. There's a lot, you know, at best you can get co-opetition that goes on. And I'm not saying it never happens here, but the fact is that I can put out a call to colleagues at other hospitals, at universities in the area. I can call GCP and say, I could use some industry partners with the following bona fides. I can call the Center for Health Affairs and say, you know, can you get me some data on the following? And I think really over the last 8 to 10 years, there's been so much emphasis on you know, the fact that a rising tide lifts all boats here, and that when we really cooperate with each other, we're capable of getting some pretty remarkable things done.
Yeah, I'll
I
second
think,
that.
you know, it's a great environment to be working in, you know, and it's funny when I go outside this region and I talk about what's happening in Cleveland. I sometimes get made fun of for the amount of enthusiasm I have for it. But the fact is that it really is genuinely unique. And I, you know, I try to emphasize to the people who live here and who work here that this is, you know, you really do want to do everything you can to foster this, to nurture it, to participate in it. To have those conversations. When we connect people, we all win.
Yeah, no, and I'll second that. I mean, I'm not originally from Northeast Ohio, the region, but you know, the thing about Northeast Ohio, I have to say, is that you know, you pick up the phone and people answer it, and it's amazing how easily you can get connected to people that, you know other people that can be of, you know, help for whatever reason. So it's really, I think that's really important. So I do have a question online here, and let me put this to Bill Howell. I think we'll start. And so the question is, as an early stage startup, how are the consortia different from other funding sources such as SBIRs or STTRs from an application perspective? Can you try to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. To start off with, we're a prototype consortium, so you do have to have a prototype. Now, prototype is very loosely defined. It could be a physical piece, compound, device, something of that nature, but it could also be a model. It could be a best practice. It could be an algorithm. It is very, very loose. But what it really is saying, you don't come with just a good idea. You've had to have some sort of testing that gives you an idea that you have a lead candidate. I guess that's really where I would say you've got a lead candidate somewhere that now you're ready to go explore. And so, and when we look at the military, we don't get all their R&D dollars. They still do basic research, and they, you know, about 50% of that goes into their own laboratories and about 50% goes out. So depending on where you are as an early startup, you may be a little bit prior, but what we have found that most of them have fit into the early stage, and our money is kind of spread across the spectrum. We have got phase 2 clinical trials going on for Dingy and TBI as we speak today. But on the other side of it, we've got some very early stuff, TRL 3 and 4 in many different domains. And so just because you're early doesn't mean that they won't fund you or that you're out of scope. My one suggestion would always be reach out. Go to MTech, MTEC-SC. You see our whole team there, and just reach out. And believe me, within 24 hours, we will contact you back in some way, shape, or form. That's one of our standard metrics. If we ain't there in 24 hours, somebody's butt's getting whipped.
Yeah, that's very good.
You know, Albert, if I could jump on that a little bit too.
Yes,
so I work
please.
with a lot of startup companies that may go the route of SBIR, STTR versus looking at Department of Defense funding or OT funding or other consortium funding. And it really comes down to what are you trying to accomplish? So, your SBIR, STTR is for sort of investigating and pulling on a thread for a new idea that you want to investigate for your company. And as Bill Howell pointed out, sometimes it can be very early stage. Sometimes you can be TRL2 and say, look, I want to show initial proof of concept on this. And you may do that in a phase 1 SBIR, or if you're a company, an SBIR, not an STTR. And an STTR, as you may or may not be aware, is if you're going to have your PI is inside of an academic institution, and if most of the money is going to go to the academic institution. Both of them have to originate from the small business. The work in a consortium really is focused on solving the problem that they want you to solve. And in particular, if you're looking at the Department of Defense, your SBIR and STTR vehicles for DoD are contracts, not grants. And it's a subtle but very important difference between, whether it's work that you want to do or work they want you to do. So you really do want to take a careful look at that on a case-by-case basis if you're in a startup, to say, what are my objectives? And make sure you're not letting the tail wag the dog on this.
Let me add to that, is we do contracts as well. We do very, very, very few grants, but they're milestone driven, and that's purposeful. We want you to be able to hit your milestone. But the good news is, if you hit your target and the DoD still has money, you don't have to do another solicitation and another proposal. We can just move you right in and continue with a modification, the work that you have, which is huge. When you look at something like NIH, you can put you get in your proposal in, you get your grant, you do your thing for 2 years, and then you sit for 2 more years while you wait for the next proposal that you had to write, and hope that you get funded.
I always say, I heart plus ups. So, yeah.
Yeah, if I could add one more comment. I mean, I think Elizabeth's contrast between, SBIR is helpful in what your ideation is. The consortium is what the federal customer wants. I mean, it's yours versus theirs, right? The other way I'd characterize it simply is SBIRs are capital R, small d, because you have to have a commercialization strategy in the SBIR proposal. I would say that inside consortia, because they're contracts and the customer is looking for deliverables through the consortium management agency, it's small r, capital D. And if that helps our audience, that's another good contrast, I think, is accurate.
Agreed 100%.
If you don't have another question, I'm going to play a little more on that, Allison.
Go, please.
Okay. I have to say, I think Bill hit the nail on the head. We really have 2 clients. We obviously start with what the government tells us to do, but if we don't have a consortium that can function well, then we've done disservice to our members as well. And that's why I think when you come to us, even as Bill says, you're really looking for what our military client wants, but our military client understands that you got to have a civilian market too.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they will share the cost to get to your civilian market. If there's, as many of you know, the pathway to get to FDA approval goes this way, but you can offshoot a couple different ways for variants. And the military may pay that core that now 80% of your cost to get to your civilian market has been taken care of, or some portion of that. And so don't be frightened just because, I've got this widget and I want to do it this way. And for this piece, if you listen a little stronger, you might hear, I can help cost out some of my own pathway through the military. And then at the end, you pay for part of it and your outside sources pay for part of it in the military. And I'll give you a really, really good example. We have a particular company that has a vascular regenerative medicine vascular piece. Basically, if you have compartment syndrome and you lose part of your arm or your leg, you lose muscle, you lose a bunch of nerves, and you lose some of your veins and arteries. They were looking at a junction for dialysis patients that if you keep putting the boy, brain just went dead. The catheter in, eventually you destroy the vein or the artery you're going into. And so they were looking at that, and they had actually gone out and raised money for that. And then we went to them and said, you know, we've got these piece parts in an arm or a leg we'd like to repair. And the military paid, you know, like $5 to $10 million. They had already gotten $100 million to go to the market in the other place. They are now in the Ukraine with their product. And so it was a really nice marriage of putting the two together.
You know, Bill Howell, I can't emphasize enough, and dovetailing what you said, you know, one of the things that you can get out of one of these consortia is that pathway to a first indication for a technology. And that allows you, you know, because you're serving a military purpose, because you're taking care of the thing that they want you to take care of. The nice thing about that is oftentimes that first indication will get you 80% of the way to a second indication that may actually have a bigger commercial outlet for you. But you've got revenues now. And, you know, that's, you know, if you're a small business, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, it's a complete game changer. And the fact that you have, you do bring the FDA, you know, the FDA consultants to the table as well. Can't stress enough how important that is, particularly to a small business that may not have the resources to go after that on their own.
Yeah, I'll just hopefully top this, but over the years, having managed ATI and seen a lot of consortia, and the member benefits and the benefits of being a team member of a successful group that wins a solicitation inside the consortium is you augment your in-house R&D dollars in a meaningful way that helps you also get to it could be a government market, but it also can be a path to a civilian market. And that's a reason for companies to come in and be members of the consortium.
Great, thanks. Well, we're about out of time, but I've got a couple questions coming in online, which I'm going to direct this one to you, Bill Mahoney. So here's a question. As a small business developing technology, is it hard to work with consortium? I hear government, you know, projects are difficult to work with, and we're not used to doing that kind of stuff. So
well, that's why you want to work with MATCorp. We've got a lot of experience in this world. We take the burden off of you, as does, and Bill Howell mentioned this, the consortium management firm. The consortium management firm has the you know, federally approved accounting systems, has the contract structures that are familiar to the federal government. And so what we try to do is take that burden off of the small company, and invariably that's why you work with a partner who's knowledgeable in the space. I do a fair amount of work with MIT, and even MIT is learning about this space. That's why I'm in a hotel room here in Detroit right now. But what they say is that one of the biggest challenges to obtaining federal funding is awareness of the programs, familiarity with the systems that are there, and then have a Sherpa who can guide you through the whole process, right? And that's really the reason why you know, worthy organizations like MTech and ATI and MATCorp are all lined up to help companies get there. We're the Sherpas, right? So we're happy to work with you on that basis.
thank you, Bill Mahoney. Well, folks, I do appreciate your time, Bill Mahoney, Bill Howell, and Elizabeth. Thank you very, very much for giving us your time to participate on this panel. So I think if there's any final comments, Bill Howell, I'm going to ask you to make the final comments as our MTech. Since this is about medical technologies, I'll give you the final statements.
Thank you, Al. I think I'll play a little bit off what just Bill stated is the way that people usually lose a proposal or don't win a proposal, put it in the other way, is they can't put it in the context of how the military is going to use it.
Right.
They understand how the technology works. They know the clinical need, and they can write all that, and they get really good grades in a peer review for their scientific merit. And then they fail utterly in trying to figure out, well, no, it's not going to be used with a doc and a CT scanner. It's in fact going to be out on the battlefield somewhere, and you might have a nurse or a PA if you're lucky. And in many cases, it might be a medic. And so we do that translational for you. And the important part of that is then you get to decide, do you really have something that's merited to take the time and effort to write that proposal? We find that in some cases we reduce the number of proposals that go on because people realize, oh, I really don't have it after all. And so you don't waste your time. And when we find, I think our latest statistics show 62% of all proposals that go in are found acceptable or higher. That's almost unheard of. And when I look at my competition at the Congressional Directed Medical Research Program, if they get 12%, they've had a stellar day because they use the FAR. And so this is, I think, the biggest, to me, the absolute biggest reason why I came out of semi-retirement, and my old boss, 2-star General Lester Martinez Lopez, who's now the head of all docs in DOD, we both jumped into this thing with MTech because of the OT, because of that absolute reason. We could have that discourse and everybody gets to win from it.
Great.
I'm done.
No, that's great. Thank you very, very much. Again, I'll thank our panelists again, and I think that'll be a wrap. Really, very much appreciate it. Thank you all for participating.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you, Al.
Bye.
Bye-bye.